You're about to see a review session based around the 16PF questionnaire. It's designed to help you consider a particular style for the review session, but it is not setting this up as the only approach to take. The video will also allow you to see how a review session can progress through the following 5 stages: establishing an agreed purpose, exploring style and behaviour, giving questionnaire feedback, drawing out implications, summarising and closing. You may like to take notes as you observe this introduction.
Hi there,
Hello.
Sanju. Hello. I'm Tricia Owen, and
Yes.
thank you for coming along today. What we're going to be doing is talking through the questionnaire that you did with us recently and talking through how your picture and profile came across.
Yes.
And we've got about half an hour for this process.
Okay.
And I want to emphasise to you, it's very much a two-way process. It's going to involve you as much as me, so it's
Sure.
not just me telling you, you're the expert in yourself, because
Yes.
you've lived with yourself for many years. yeah?
Yes.
While I'm talking, I'll be taking odd notes just to remind myself, and please feel free yourself to
Yes.
take some notes if you want to take something away with you. And in terms of confidentiality, you've signed an agreement which says you're comfortable with all this.
Yes, I am.
Yeah, great.
Yes.
Okay, so just a little bit going back to the questionnaire itself. In fact, you did 2 versions. How did you actually find doing the questionnaire?
A little bit of a drag the second time, because partly I think because I was just impatient to know what the results were. I mean, it was interesting filling it in, but my main focus of interest was what's the answers, what's the results going to be like.
And any sense of difference between the 2 versions?
I found on the second one, some of the choices given, I couldn't agree with either of them.
Okay. Well, we'll talk, as you were so impatient to find out, we'll get on to that. So let me explain a little bit about the questionnaire. It's called 16PF, which
Yes.
stands for 16 Personality Factors.
Yes.
And these were derived by a psychologist called Raymond Cattell, and he started his work about 50 years ago.
Right.
And it's been researched and developed and quite widely used in
Yes.
the UK and throughout the world ever since. So it's not just an overnight gimmick from a newspaper. It really is a very well-researched questionnaire.
Yes.
And it's very much about your style, about how you do things. It's not about how able you are. So we talk about your style, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have abilities in that area. It is very much a snapshot in time. So, I mean, you filled it in today.
Sure.
If you filled it in again 6 months down the road, or if you filled it in when you were at university, the results do change to a certain
Yes.
extent, because we all as individuals mature and develop, and life circumstances do change us.
Yes. Yes.
And it's self-report, so all I'm feeding back to you is what you've already said about yourself. So there's no particular magic in
Fine,
anything that I'm
fine.
going to be talking with you today. And the way it's organised is that on each of the factors, and let me just show you a summary sheet. Here are the 16 factors listed down the centre.
Yes.
On each of the 16 there is a 10-point scale, and most people in fact will occur in this middle band, that
Right.
sort of average band. That will account for about 2/3 of people.
Yes.
And what we've done with your particular scores on this, we've compared you to a group of 1,000 British males.
Fine. Yes.
And so when we talk about this side of average or that side of average,
Yes.
what we mean by average is 1,000 British males. So
Fine.
that's the comparison group. Okay. And obviously if you're more to this side or to that side, they would be more extreme scores. Yeah. No significance in the fact that the numbers go from low to high. It's quite arbitrary. They could have been the other way around.
Sure.
So we tend to talk about left and right rather than
Then,
high and low.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think that's probably enough sort of background around the questionnaire.
So you're saying there's good and bad points on either side of the scale, is that right? At either extreme? One is not necessarily better or worse than the other, either
Indeed.
extreme. Yeah,
Indeed.
fine.
Yes, there's no good or bad.
You may now like to pause the video and reflect on what this introduction has achieved. A key issue to consider is, has rapport been established? If so, How has this been achieved? Also consider whether Sanjeev now knows something about the questionnaire and the process to be expected, the timescales and so on. Think of one more thing you would include in this introduction. Now look at the next stage of this review session, which begins to explore Sanjeev's life.
One of the other issues with this questionnaire is that the version you've done is the British version, and it's being compared against British males, and now
Yes.
you've spent quite a part of your life in India, haven't you?
Yes.
From what years in your life were you actually in India?
Between the ages of 1 and 4, and again from 9 to 15.
And some quite formative years in that time.
Yes.
Okay. So therefore, the sort of picture that comes through may be a little hazy as a result. And I think it'd be really interesting to sort of validate the pictures that are coming through, and for you to comment. I mean, we would always do this, but particularly, you know, where is this coming from?
It's interesting you say that, but again, what I said about some of the questions which seem to be more about emotions, about would you prefer that or would you prefer this? And I said I could think of 4 or 5 different options which seemed to me to be better options than the 2 given. I can't recall offhand, but that may be a cultural thing. That may be an instance where, you know, I would come up with 2 different options as being much more appropriate. I mean, I actually had one particular thought along these lines while I was doing this questionnaire, and I just thought one of the questions. I mean, there are a number of questions of I'd rather be an architect or a publisher, or along those lines.
Around careers.
Around careers. It just struck me at that point that for many people from, say, an Indian culture, brought up in that background, there isn't much choice in careers. So your whole approach to the world doesn't revolve so much around making these choices between these different careers. And it might very well be neutral because it's all the same to you.
That's a useful insight for me as well to understand, yes.
You see how Tricia has got Sanjeev talking about himself. This is especially pertinent given the issue of cross-cultural differences in this case. It's also useful to find out about the person's real life. Remember, 16PF is only a summary. However, let us now move on to the third stage of the review session, where you have the responsibility to give the person some feedback concerning their 16PF profile.
What I propose is just to explain that these 16, as we call them, personality factors, do cluster into some broader themes. So rather than work down 16, what I propose is that we look at some of these themes that emerge, and your choice, if I just jot them down. One is around introversion and extroversion.
Yes.
Another is around how you cope with pressure,
Yes.
whether you cope with it in a sort of anxious way whereby you show your feelings, you get emotionally stressed about things, or whether you cope with pressure in a more calm and coping sort of way. And the other theme we're looking at is control, whether you tend on the whole to be a low control person, who goes as the wind goes or whatever, or someone who is more high control, more structured in their approach to life. So if I give you a choice of 3 of those themes, where would you like to start?
It's funny because I've just written down control here myself, so I think we could start with that one.
The same song sheet there. That's okay. So control, and control is a nice simple one to start with. There are 2 factors that are involved in control, and so a low control person is someone who would be this side on the G factor: flexible, expedient, non-conforming, ends justifies the means, and on the Q3 side would not have a clear picture of themselves. They'd be questioning themselves, wondering where they're going in life, maybe slightly undisciplined, or have standards that aren't immediately apparent to other people. It's the low control. On the high control side, somebody who's more disciplined, more structured, responsible, conforming, or on the Q3 side, clear idea of where they're going in self-concept, and not necessarily ambitious, but just got this clear steer and direction in life. This is where I'm aiming for. It may not be to the top, but that's the way I'm going. Any sense, Sanjeev, of where you would sit in that?
Without a doubt.
Without
a doubt. This side of the spectrum.
Yeah.
I think one of the things the thing that I noted down here was that very issue of. I think that this covers it perfectly. Question self. I mean, I've got self-doubt written down here. I frequently find myself unable to really say this is who I am with the same degree of confidence and clarity that I notice other people doing. And I often discover that I'm something. I think I'm one thing, and then I will discover, after having gone through some experience, that no, that's my image. What I am is actually something else. So I think that's it's very significant.
That's right. And I mean, if you had to sort of put a circle around approximately where you see yourself on that?
3.
3.
3, 2, 3.
2, 3, sort of in that.
2, 3, possibly 4. I mean, I think as I'm becoming more aware of that, I try harder to be clearer about myself. So 2 and 4, maybe. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting, because you're seeing yourself between sort of 2 to 4 on the scale, and in fact, the way you responded came out right in the middle there as 3.
3, right? Yeah.
So still this sense of who am I? Where could I be?
Yes, very much so.
Flexible options, and some people spend their lives there and are quite comfortable just thinking of all the options ahead of them.
Right.
One doesn't need to be at this side.
Sure.
It's quite okay to be at either side.
Yeah.
And the other factor then that comes into control is the G factor here, which is around sort of rules and rule following and flexibility. So flexible on this side, more disciplined and structured on that side. Any sense when you are in your work, in your leisure, where you prefer to be?
Possibly again on the flexible side this time, maybe not a 3, possibly a 4, say.
Notice how Tricia allows Sanjeev to choose the areas for discussion. She's also given him an idea of the characteristics associated with particular factors, and then invites him to comment and estimate himself before disclosing his 16PF score. This helps to demonstrate how 16PF is not the only source of information. Please do remember that this is not the only way of talking about scores. So far, Sanjeev has discussed matters quite generally. To make this more meaningful, it helps to make links to more concrete situations. Watch how Tricia encourages Sanjeev to make these links.
What is it that makes you say
that? I'm much easier, if you like, with flexibility, woolliness, softness, as opposed to sort of hardness, discipline. I mean, if you ask me to sort of, put different words together, instinctively, discipline can feel like a sort of restrictive thing. But having said that, I'm well aware that discipline is not necessarily a restrictive thing, and so again, there's a conflict, I suppose, between the way I am or the way I tend to do things and the way I think things could be or should be. So I'd put it about 4.
Okay.
Yeah.
When I just look at that, any times that has actually brought you into conflict?
Yes, it has.
And you said 4,
yes,
and it is 4.
Yeah. Yeah, it has.
Any particular conflict you can describe?
I think just in terms of going along with people. Again, I don't know if this dovetails into control, but going along with other people's ideas when I don't necessarily want to myself. I don't know if that fits into this.
Marginally, it's also looking a little bit like this one here,
Right.
which is Q2, which is around this sort of group
Yeah,
oriented,
yeah.
likes to make decisions with the group. You know, if the group
Yes.
says go, tends to go.
Yes.
And at the other end of that scale is someone who's more comfortable with their own
Right,
decisions
right.
and self-sufficient. So possibly what you've described is a little bit around
Yeah.
that. What sort of rules do you find yourself following and which ones do you find yourself disregarding? Because very often that middle
Right,
ground where you are, I
right.
mean, 4 to 7 is this middle ground,
Yeah.
is somebody who would look at a rule and think, now, is this worth following or should I disregard it? They will tend to
Yeah.
pick and choose which rules to follow and which ones to disregard.
Right.
So perhaps if you could think of some examples of things that you would adhere to
Right.
and others that you would ignore.
I think traffic rules are one, but again that could be cultural because in India they're completely disregarded. It is almost a free-for-all, and it's just on an intuitive basis that people drive almost, if you like. It's just as long as nobody crashes, everything's fine. So that's one example.
What options do you now have? Clearly, this will be determined by time issues and the purpose